The China East-West exhibition focused on two different case studies, two cities. There are, in terms of urbanization, a number of divides all across the world, but East-West of China are quite peculiar in the way in which urban transformation were developed in the last 20 years or so. The cities we chose were Shanghai, that is placed in the east of China and is one of the more rapid developed towns and cities in the country. At the moment, I think it's a megalopolis of 23 million people, and it was probably around 7 to 8 million at the beginning of the new century. Kunming is a developing city, but at the same time is within a region that we do consider as a rural one. So there is a very interesting contrast in between rural and urban development within the city of Kunming, and at the same time in between that region and the coastal regions that are usually considered more developed. We split basically the exhibition in two different areas. One is focusing on Kunming, the other one on Shanghai. So in the first instance, we organized two different research groups or curatorial teams that supported us, me, Ringao, and Nick Temple. At the entrance of the exhibition, there were two large walls on which we showcased the urban history and evolution of the two cities. And then, by analyzing contemporary projects, we understood that there were topics that were shared in between these two different contexts. So one was dealing with urbanization, urban development, usually rapid urban development. And the other one is dealing with heritage, conservation, and reuse. So we basically organized all of our case studies and projects in the room by underlining these two pathways that are shared in between the case studies. Shanghai approved, in the beginning of the new century, approved the master plan for not just the city, but the whole region, the metropolitan region, that is called 1966, meaning one town and 9 new towns of 1 million people each. So part, of our reflection started by looking at these case studies in terms of new towns that were built around the city center of Shanghai.
欢迎您乘坐轨道交通9号线，本次列车终点站松江新城，下一站佘山，请为需要帮助的乘客让座。下车的乘客请提前做好准备，从左边车门下车。
因为小镇我们的理解来说，它是自然生成的，从几个人到几户人到几十户人、几百户、几千户。但是对于西方来讲呢，就是它是小镇。那对国内来讲，我一夜之间一两年之内，我要造出来一个，比如说上万户、几千户的小区，就我一夜之间要达到这种规模的话，因为这过程太快了，也没有人系统的去琢磨过，我本人也没有仔细的去研究过。因为我重新规划有很多合理的地方，也有很多不合理的地方，但是现在没有办法去评判，只能过几十年再看了。因为市中心房价太快了嘛，涨得太高了，所以很多人大量的人就迁过去，但是它应该是形成一个完整的一个体系。那现在可能居住是过去了，而且很快的时间过去了。
So speaking about urbanization, there are several contributions that are focused on the new towns in Shanghai. I found very interesting one project by Tom Ming that is called 10 Courtyard Houses. This residential neighborhood, basically, has been designed as a form of opposition to the homologation and banalization of the suburban sprawl. So Tom Ming, he made, I think, a very interesting reinterpretation of the historical settings and designed in the end 10 different houses that are based on a courtyard type. An interesting case study that is being recently built in Qingpu, one of the new towns in Shanghai, is Qingpu Town Hall by Atelier Zeta Plus. Again, it is based on the idea of inner space. In this case, the architects work on the idea of architecture in a very kind of contemporary way, as a place in which the feelings and the well-being and the idea of connection with landscape is at the core of the design principles. At the same time, the building is very contemporary, but it reflects the idea of having a sequence of spaces, of having an internal garden, is based on the idea of having natural light, and is kind of addressing the question of how we should be designing our civic buildings in quite an original but contemporary way. More recently, the idea of creative districts arrived in Shanghai and was probably to some extent an interpretation of what we were delivering in Europe. Nowadays, there are more than 80 creative districts in town, but I would mention Xintiandi for sure, as it was probably the very first one in which the city council and the architects experimented a balance in between the legacy of some heritage buildings, so a kind of an approach that is very close to conservation, and on the other side, some new development, including some landscape and housing, as well as a new mall center. So it is a very different approach from what we usually have in the Western world. And if you look at more recent projects, like the Silk Wall by Philip One, it's kind of high-tech, low-tech project. It's high-tech because it's fully designed with digital technologies. At the same time, this is keeping the idea of the heritage, because the original walls of the building have been kept, but the architect is thinking about simply a new facade that is partially covering the previous one. At the same time, the project is low-tech. It's low-tech because the materials that he has been using are quite poor, concrete blocks that you can find on the market, and also you can build it but using, very traditional techniques. So it is a little bit of a mix. It's the idea of keeping the heritage, but it's the idea of putting some innovation thanks to, the architectural design. And at the same time, it's very low cost. So to some extent, this is quite sustainable.
Kunming was started like 700 AD, and when the city was developed, it was built strongly according to feng shui principles. So there are 3 mountains outside the city and a lake on the southwest of the city. So the city was built according to the relationship to these 3 mountains and a big lake. But eventually, there are 3 mountains inside the city and a small lake inside the city. So we call it 3 big mountains and 1 big lake, and small little mountains and a small lake inside the city. The feng shui master who directed the design of the city, he identified a mountain range on the north as a dragon. So the dragon's head coming into the city. And then by looking at that, he designed the city as a shape of a tortoise. So the tortoise head is this small mountain and then meet up with the dragon's head. In that way, a lot of auspicious energies will come into the city, and then the small mountain in the city become very important location for the government office, education institute throughout the history, even now. The traditional axis from north start from the small mountain to the south. That's the only thing being kept now in the whole city. And then the commercial street in Yuan dynasty, Ming dynasty, and Qing dynasty has been maintained until today. The city historically is very remote, but the change came in 1930s as a result of the outbreak of anti-Japanese war. So a lot of very famous education institute, factories, military groups, they moved from the central part to Kunming, which is the only part was not invaded by Japanese. And then because of that, in 1950s and 60s, the city developed quickly. So in 1982, the city became one of the 24 biggest cities in China, and also being given the title of famous historical and cultural city. However, the main aim changed slightly in 1990s because the city set up the plan to become the main gate to the Southeast Asia. So as a result, a lot of roads and high flies being built in very short period. But as a result of that, many historical streets were demolished. That brought in a lot of problems, traffic problems, pollution problems, and also lost the characters of this particular city. So the current situation is the master plan wanted to bring the whole focus, emphasis back to being harmony of the nature environment, which is these 3 mountains outside and 3 mountains inside the city, and to promote sustainable design, which that's, I think, the direction we all like to see now. There are altogether 55 minority ethnic groups in China, and 25 of them live in this province. So the cultural diversity has been enormous throughout the history. The current problem is a lot of villages has started use brick and concrete to build their own house, but treated their traditional knowledge as out of date. In that way, a lot of experience and knowledge about how to design sustainable housing that developed through generations has been lost. So the architect's aim in this case is bring back all the traditional knowledge and promote them as not out-of-date knowledge, but very updated, sustainable knowledges. The last point is to say, when we study the Kunming cities, the main focus we are studying is this commercial street. It's a commercial street has been developed throughout history from Yuan and Ming dynasty. But today, when a lot of other traditional streets being demolished, this was kept. But because the timber buildings need to be repaired and rebuilt, but the government attracted a lot of investment to rebuild this street. In order to attract the funding, they allow the developers to have one street being built in traditional style, but on the other side of the street, they allow them to develop the contemporary modern shopping malls. So when the developer starts to build one side of the street into its traditional forms, it's very difficult to build the original as original. But in order to demonstrate those are all tradition and heritage, one way they are using is to find those survivor craftsmen who can still do the original crafts. By employ them coming to do all the timber crafts and metal crafts, that's another way to say they have employed the tradition and the authentic tradition in that place. This is different from other places in China, where some place building the totally new traditional style commercial street, but using the philosophy, humanity philosophy in the history to demonstrate they are coherent with the tradition. So that's one of our study focus of this city.
I think the exhibition was satisfactory because we did a lot of work that was useful to some extent to ourselves, because we focused on some ideas, some of our research topics, and also we found out new directions. So at this point in time, 1 year after, we are still working on some of these topics. I've been delivering some papers, some research in terms of contemporary architecture in China and typologies, as my colleagues as well. They're working on several different topics at the moment. On a different note, I think it was very interesting to work into a public art gallery for us. There were a lot of people involved in the organization, and that was a very good opportunity to link to, for example, our students, our student society, as well as we did some events in terms of public engagement. And so within the ROTOR project, we also delivered and contributed to some extent to a kind of artistic events that were held into the gallery during the exhibition time. And we organized the exhibition in such a way that we wanted that to be engaging with the public. And also we included some of the students' work in there, because we've been working in China, especially in Kunming, with our students, and so Ringao made it possible, to showcase some of our students' work. That was also, I think, part of the reflections that we put together when we organized the exhibition.